Hello again. This is Homeschool Keeper with Rebecca Ray. I am currently getting ready to do this live. Um, Forgive my appearance today. I've been really working on a lot of content, including writing a book, and I try to be very transparent and very real on video because I don't think it helps anyone to hide your flaws. I think it creates barriers to entry for people actually to not see that you're a real human being doing something and living life. And I have no desire to be a barrier to entry for anyone. If I can do this, you can. That's kind of where I am. So today we are going to go into overcoming fear and self-doubt in homeschooling. I always have notes, so if you see me looking at the screen, it's because I'm looking at notes. I don't like a whole lot of fluff and filler. I feel like that gets in the way of getting to content and information that you want. That's the reason you're here in the first place. So I'm going to get that all out of the way at the very beginning and just say, you know, there are links below to resources and to ways to support the channel. Obviously, like, subscribe, and hit the little bell icon if you want to see more content from Homeschool Keeper. That's the best way to support us right now at this stage. And now we can move on to the information you're actually tuned into the video for. So I'm Becca. I am a homeschool mom with about 5 years of homeschool experience. And I have a passion for helping others to explore, create, and structure their homeschool freedom. There's a lot of freedom in homeschooling, and it can be very overwhelming to structure that freedom in a way that makes sense for you and your family. A lot of people don't know where to start. I want to help with that. The overwhelm of, I can really do this just about any way I want. I know that was a little overwhelming for me when I first started. So that is, and when I decided and committed to do this homeschooling thing, especially I am a single mom, that the idea that, you know, the plan and the structure was really all up to me was a little bit much to try to figure out. So I want to try to help you figure out, because I've been where you are, if that's where you are. Okay, so wrapping up self-promotion and why I'm qualified to give this advice and speak from experience and what I've seen other people experience as well. And going on to why you're actually here. One of the fears people run into immediately, obviously, like I already spoke on, is that there's so much freedom in homeschooling. Where do you even begin to start to structure? You were never trained to. Well, you tune into things like this and you ask questions in homeschool communities. There are a lot of them on Facebook. I personally recommend the Hip Homeschool Moms page. They tend to always be willing to give advice. And in general, the homeschooling community, online and elsewhere, is very welcoming and very willing to give advice and very willing to help you through whatever your struggle is in getting started on this journey. There are plenty of people willing to help you through it, willing to, you know, help you experience the joy of homeschooling that they've found for themselves and their families. And the next issue that people run into would probably be the fear that you're unqualified to do it, which kind of goes into the last fear, because you don't necessarily know how you're going to structure everything, and then it feeds into this idea of, well, maybe I'm just not qualified to do it. And the fact is, you teach your kid from age 0 to age 5 without any real intervention from a school system. And children are natural learners. So I think you have to tap in to the part of you as a parent that is naturally a teacher to your child, and tap into the fact that children are natural learners. They want to know things. And how you reach your individual child, who you know better than anyone, with the information that they need to move forward. I do have a little bit of education background. Some college. I didn't complete a degree, but there's this concept called right to fit, where you're supposed to try to teach a child in a way that they'll understand the information. And I think that's important. And I think it's one of the things that the school system has really dropped the ball on. And it's not really their fault. They kind of have to teach to what works for the majority, and it really kind of ends up working for no one, in my opinion. But when you're working one-on-one with the child, you can cater their education to them in a way that the school isn't capable of doing for them, really, because there isn't the manpower, there isn't the time to really focus on any one student as an individual and how an individual learns. But you as a parent, you can, and you know your child. So that's what qualifies you, is how well you know your child and how well you know the way that they learn, and you have been teaching them. Now, the other thing is, there are tons of resources out there. There's tons of support. You have access to curriculum, which is really, which is really what teachers use as well. They use curriculum. They teach from curriculum. You do have access to curriculum. There are even free curriculums online. Books, in my opinion, are the best curriculum. If you can teach your child how to read, and you can teach your child some level of independence, you're halfway there. And if you can instill in them a love of learning, this job can get really simple for you really quickly, to some degree. And I'm not going to say that that's the miracle answer to everything, but if you create an environment that encourages your child into lifelong learning, an environment that, the school system isn't, in a lot of cases, because they can't right to fit for an individual student, a lot of children lose their love of learning because they're forced into a way of learning that doesn't work for them and frustrates them and makes the learning process more difficult for them. And that's certainly the case with my kid. I've seen that with a lot of kids that struggle in school. It's not that they're not smart. It's that they need to learn in a different way than the way the school is trying to get them to learn. And it makes it very unenjoyable for them. And that was my case too. And I was in resource classes all through school because of it. And that's another issue. If you yourself have learning disabilities, well, how can you do this? I'm extremely ADD. I have some other learning issues. Do you know how you work around your learning issues? And you should definitely attempt to find ways to leverage what you are good at and how you do learn against what you need to learn. And that will help you figure out how to teach your child as well. One thing I've seen with dyslexic parents, and I'm to some degree dyslexic as well, using different tools to teach your child how to spell, and certainly using curriculum that a spelling curriculum helps a lot. My child spells way better than I do. Way better than I do. And I'm a terrible speller. And I was able to teach him how to spell well, even though I'm a terrible speller, partly through curriculum, partly through having the right tools. Fridge magnets were a big help to me with that, because I can move them around and I can actually feel the letters. Things like that are very helpful. Having the right tools and the right knowledge really helps. And then having access to a whole world of information that's out there with a Google search. Like, how do I teach this? You have the entire internet of information. And everything's on the internet. So don't feel like if you're coming in short in those areas, don't feel like you can't. You can. You just need to equip yourself with the tools to overcome where the challenges are. And there will be challenges. Don't be afraid to ask for help. That's another thing. I've had friends who were tutors come alongside me to help me figure out how to catch my son up, particularly in math. Math is a sore subject for us, partly because Jareth does not like math. He does not enjoy math. And so I've needed help with math for him. And you have to not be afraid to ask for help, ask for resources, ask what has worked for other parents in your situation, because there is a parent somewhere who has been in your situation. There's a homeschooling parent somewhere who has been in your shoes with that. So don't be afraid to ask for help. Chances are, if they're homeschooling, they've ran into something similar. Maybe it's not math. Maybe it's language arts. Maybe it is spelling. But don't be afraid to ask, okay, we're having this problem. What do I do from here? And plugging into a homeschool network or support team, whether that's becoming part of a homeschooling group that meets, a co-op that meets, and maybe the parent with better math skills teaches math once a week, and you just kind of help your child with math for the rest of the week. Or whatever that looks like to you, whatever helps you and helps your child, like, plug into those groups, plug into that support system. If that means you have friends around you who are also homeschooling or have homeschooled, my biggest support has been my friend Claire, who I met at school of ministry. She homeschooled 2 kids all the way through school, and they're now both college graduates. So a lot of the times, if I'm feeling doubtful or I'm feeling scared for where I'm going, I think about Claire and I ask opinions on what I should do from Claire, from my friend Jennifer, who homeschools, from my friends who are teachers. And from my friends who are tutors, those, you know, don't be afraid to ask the people who are in your support system and who are in your network for help when you run into a challenge. And that about covers the feeling unqualified. You don't necessarily have to have a teaching degree to teach. You have to have the right tools, the right resources, and remember that self-teaching is a thing, and you have the resources available to you to self-teach as well. You're tuning into this. That's something too. Fear that the child will not learn enough. Yes, that's a legitimate fear as well. Not that they won't learn enough. Let's define enough, though, because they're going to learn. And if you're focused on trying to shove a bunch of information to them and stuff it into their head in your time frame, maybe you're looking at it wrong. Maybe it's creating the environment for them to learn, giving them the tools, equipping them to learn it, and working with them, certainly. And from there, you know, they will learn at their own pace, and every child has a different pace. Every child has a different pace. Jared's probably right now a year behind in math. It happens, but you can work with them. You can ask for help. You can ask for support. You can ask for tutoring, and you can equip them with the tools they need to move forward. If your child is having a particularly difficult time in a subject, you can help them. And one day they might surprise you. I know that when I first started homeschooling, I wasn't sure if Jared was learning. And I know a lot of parents who've experienced this. I'm just not sure if my kid is learning. And then one day you'll be sitting there and a topic will come up and that ties into something you touched on in homeschool, and they will spill the knowledge out of them on that subject, or they will show the skill that you've been trying to get them to show in your structured homeschool time in their regular everyday life. And that's really the goal. What are the skills that we're trying to teach them, if not for living an everyday life, of being able to function in everyday life? And that surprise factor happens a lot. I've seen people go through that, where they're at one point, they're like, I'm just not sure if my child is learning. And then the next week, the next 2 weeks, whatever, something will happen where their child will show them that they're learning. So be patient in waiting for those moments where your child surprises you with just how much they've learned from you, because those are proud moments, and cherish that. Also, figuring out how to reach your child with the information is a big one. And sometimes that can be harder than others. With Jareth with math, it's definitely been a challenge to figure out how to reach him when he's not naturally mathematically inclined, but he's very logical. So I tend to try to teach math more through word problems, things he can relate to, things he can chew on. The Life of Fred series has been really good for him in that it has a little bit of math every day, and there's a story to it. And he really enjoys that. And I think that has gotten us further than anything with him, because he understands what he's learning. There's something to chew on there that works with who he is and the way that he learns best. And that's part of where I'm trying to still repair the damage from his first 2 years of public school, where he also hated math, and partly because of how it was being taught to him wasn't how he learns and wasn't a way that he could relate to at all. And early in our homeschooling, I didn't help that damage at first, because I tried to continue teaching it the way the school would. And that was not a way that worked for him. So there are mistakes we all are going to make in the road, on the journey. It's a journey, and realizing the mistakes you've made so that you can correct them is a key part of all of this too. Once you realize that you've made a mistake, well, how do I correct it? Is the response. And the goal for me has always been to encourage lifelong learning for Jareth, so that if I do misstep, if I do have a gap in what I've taught him, that gap can be filled by him later, or we can go back and fill that gap. That gap will get filled because of his own natural curiosity being nourished. And the goal is that he'll always want to learn more. He'll always want to know this information. So if he finds a gap, he wants to fill it. And he does that a lot. And he does that well now. Instead of fully being dependent on somebody to teach him, he'll take it on himself to learn something. And that can happen during homeschool time. And that often happens during his free time, because when I'm schooling, I'm schooling. And that's how I work. That isn't necessarily how you'll work. A lot of people very much let the child have the reins on learning. And sometimes that works very well. We need some degree of structure for us. And that's what works best for us. And I guide what we're learning, what subjects, things like that. And then I cater how he learns to him. I cater how we learn it to how he learns. And that's how I work. I'm looking at my notes again. Yeah. The next one is fear of the weight of responsibility for your child's future. And on that, there's only so much comfort that can be offered on this, because this is a very scary topic for a lot of parents. It's a scary topic for me, because children are individuals. Ultimately, there's only so much weight of responsibility you can give yourself for their future. Have you done everything you could to give them the future that you would want for them? What they do with it from there is their choice. And because they're individuals and because they have that free will to do what they will with it, there has to be some degree of letting go. You can't take on the full weight. I have seen amazing parents raise kids who were a mess. I have seen parents who were a mess raise amazing kids. And part of that is because of who that individual child is, apart from what they've been taught by their parents, apart from what they've been told. And I have so much compassion for that, because there's only so much control we have over who our children become. And certainly there's a large degree of influence in parenting. But there's also a large degree of individualism in a child. What you must do to give your child the best chance at a future that is desirable is to equip them. Equip them with the tools, equip them with the knowledge. That's your part of the responsibility in it, is equipping them to be prepared for the life that they choose to live. Some of the responsibility is on them as they get older. What you teach them and what they take from it are two different things. And that would be the same case if they were public schooled. If they were private schooled, you know, what you equip them with and what they do with it are different things. And that goes across the board for every educational situation, for every child, and for every family. Unfortunately, we only have so much control there, and that can be scary. I'm not doubting that that's scary. That's scary for me. When I first started homeschooling and realized, oh, shoot, I can't like jump into this little person's body and make them do the thing I'm asking them to. The realization of the individualism of your child and the fact that they're going to make their choices and they're going to make their mistakes can be frightening, especially when you want them not to make your mistakes. And you are doing your best to try to make sure they don't make the mistakes you've made, but humans make mistakes. And humans make choices. Individual humans make choices for themselves. Your job is, to the best of your ability, provide them with a good foundation to work from, with a good foundation of knowledge, with a good foundation of morals, with a good foundation on the kind of person they should be, and then what they do with it is up to them. If you teach a child, if you do everything you can to empower a child to be a lifelong learner, for example, and you equip them with the skills to be able to self-teach, and they choose not to use those skills and they choose not to use that equipment, that's not your responsibility. What is your responsibility is that you provided them with that and that you did your best. And I want to emphasize that parent involvement has always been the one indicator above all the other indicators of whether a child will be academically successful and be successful in whatever they choose to do in life, has been parent support, parent involvement, and the investment that parents put in all the statistics. That's the number one indicator of success for a child, is the parent involved, not how much the parent put in monetarily to their education, not, where they were schooled necessarily, because it seems that the more parental involvement in a child's education, the more successful a child is in that education. So don't be afraid that you're ruining your child's future by choosing to homeschool them and choosing to get actively involved in educating them and equipping them. You're doing them a bigger favor than, leaving it completely up to the school. That would be a mistake. Even schools want parent involvement oftentimes because all the indicators point to that parental involvement seems to produce positive academic results for kids over income status, over family situation, over anything else. Parent involvement seems to be key to a child's education. Okay. And continuing your own education is another thing. Teaching yourself, practicing self-teaching and learning, reading in front of your child, reading to your child, showing your child what being a lifelong learner looks like, because children learn more from what we do than what we say to do. That's another thing with the whole, the whole picture is that you equip them, that you try to set an example for them, and that you give them their independence to be able to come into their own with the stuff that you've given them. And you hope and you pray that they do well with it. And that they use the tools you've given them. And they follow, hopefully you pray that they follow the example you've set for them. So if you're setting an example of being a hard worker, if you're setting an example of being a lifelong learner, if you're setting the example of these things and your child is seeing that, they learn from that too. They learn from your actions as much as they do your words, if not more. So that's something you should consider when you're making an action. What is this teaching my kid? And that's something that I've had to get into my heart as well. Am I doing what I'm asking of my child? Am I working as hard as I want my child? Do I have the work ethic I want my child to have? Am I setting the example in that way? And that's one thing. And you can. It's going to take practice. It's going to take persistence. It's going to take self-evaluation. All things you also want to teach your child to have. So don't feel, I don't want to tell you how to feel. So think about who you want your child to be, the confidence you want them to have. Tap into that and become that, because your child is learning from that as well. And you can do this. It's not always going to be easy, but what parenting situation is easy? Even if your kid is in public school and they're struggling in public school, you're going to have a situation where parenting isn't easy, where equipping your child with the knowledge and tools they need in life isn't easy. So you're taking a lot of that responsibility on, but you always had that responsibility anyway. That's making sure your child is educated has always been your responsibility since day one. You have taught them. You taught them from ages 0 to 5. You have resources. There are communities who will help you. There are people you can reach out to. And if there are people in your life who aren't supportive of what you believe you should be doing for your child, and if this is something you believe you should be doing for your child, then you need to look for voices who are supportive and who will help you, because that's going to be your foundation. And it doesn't matter what that foundation looks like. Some people need more of a foundation in that. than others. I think I needed less of a foundation in that than most people, because I, with very little hesitation, jumped at the opportunity to homeschool as soon as a couple key people in my life were on board, who I needed their approval for me. And from there, I had the go and I had the strength to be able to say, I'm going to do this. I'm going to find a way to do this. And I have since. And it was literally only a couple people. It was my friend Claire and my dad, I think, were the two major voices that I needed to hear to jump into the journey. And to be able to say, okay, I want to do this. Now I need to figure out how. And if you're trying to figure out how, you're in the right place. And then if you have the determination and the persistence to keep figuring out how, you're going to be fine. And these worries, if you let them drive you instead of discourage you, let the fear, like, you can use fear as a motivator to some degree if you flip the way you think about your fear. So if you're afraid you're unqualified, where can you get information on teaching and teaching styles and different methods of teaching? How can you educate yourself on how to do these things? Because self-teaching is a powerful tool, and people underestimate the tool of self-teaching as something that you are capable of. As something you are capable of. There are books on teaching. There are books on homeschooling. You can gather that information. Let the fear that you're unqualified drive you to that information, drive you to make yourself a better educator. The fear that your child won't learn enough, don't let that overwhelm you, because then you risk the problem where you push your child too hard and you actually push them away from being a lifelong learner and away from liking a subject. And I found that out with math with my son. Pushing too hard pushes away. Find the balance and find the resources that work for them. Let that fear drive you in the direction of find and create a determination in you to find the resources that work for your child. Find a way to reach them on those subjects that you know they're falling behind on. And take an active role in discovering what works for them. And the weight of the responsibility for your child's future. Let the fear that you didn't equip them enough drive you to make sure they're equipped. You don't have to say no to the entire situation of homeschooling if that's what you want to do. You can look these fears in the face and you can decide, okay, I have these fears. What is my action in spite of these fears? How can I counteract? That is what I'm going to leave you with. I hope this has been helpful and insightful, and encouraging, because I want you to feel so encouraged that yes, these fears are real. Yes, they're present. No, you're not the first person who has had these fears. Yes, people with these exact same fears have homeschooled their children to completion and then become wonderful, successful adults. And look for those examples, because they'll start appearing for you. You're not the first person to have these fears. What are you going to do about them? Are you going to let the fears stand in your way of going on this journey, or are those fears going to enrich the journey? And perhaps what is needed is changing how you look at those fears. Looking those fears in the face and saying, that's not going to happen. I'm not going to let it. I have the power here. And that's important. The realization that you have the power to do everything in your power to counteract the consequences that your mind is creating for you. The ability to counteract those things. You have that power. Just tap into it. Thank you. Have a great day, and I will see you again.